Okay, thank you very much, Christoph and Sebastian, for inviting me tonight. We met some times ago, and I was really impressed and inspired by the work that you are doing. As you know, I'm also a former ICRC, and I thought you really took up an issue that was urgent and burning and had not been sufficiently taken care of in the past, dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, dealing with people suffering from the aftermath of sometimes very challenging experience that they might have had in the field. So I really feel that what you're doing is very meaningful, and therefore I'm really happy to have a chance to contribute in a modest way to your work tonight by joining this webinar. So I will share my screen, and I will show a presentation that will, in the first part, I will say a few words about my own biography and what led me first to the ICRC and then later to Bhutan. And then from there, I'll move to the more the content about gross national happiness and what it is, what it means, and how it's implemented, and so on, with a few examples. So I will start sharing the screen. Okay. Yep. So do you all see my screen? Is okay?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So a few words about me and the background that led me, I'm over 70, so if I start telling my life story, it's too long, and you should never allow an old man to start telling his life story, otherwise it gets out of hand. So I will try to keep that part short, but just tell you enough that you understand what what led me to what I later did in life. So my father was Vietnamese and my mother was French. And I was born in during the time of the war. Well, the war in Vietnam started in 1940, and really became very, very violent in 45, and it went nonstop until 75. So it was a very long war, 30 years without interruption, with sometimes more, sometimes less intense, but always there. And of course, being part Vietnamese, it was with me. This is something that I was very aware of, although because my father was a diplomat, we were most of the time outside of the country, so I was not directly affected that I was personally in danger as a child, but the war was just always there, and members of my family died, and well, the way it is in the war. And because I was most of my youth in the West, I got very politically involved. And so that was the beginning of that. Given my age, I was a teenager in the 60s, and I was in Paris in 68, and I got involved in the political movement. So I was very engaged in leftist political movements. But then in August 1968, the tanks of the Warsaw Pact invaded Czechoslovakia, and as you maybe know, in Czechoslovakia there was also the Prague Spring, and basically the same thing that was happening in the West was also happening on the other side of the so-called Iron Curtain. And because I had lived in Vienna quite a lot, and Prague is really close to Vienna, I had many friends in Prague. And so I was in Paris at that time. I was like, leftist. Being very unsatisfied with society as I knew it, I somehow felt that maybe communism was the solution. And of course, I was Vietnamese, and I was very much supporting the North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. But then when the Russian tanks entered Prague, and then I heard from my friends what was happening, it was a big shock. to experience that what I thought would be a solution wasn't. So that was a very important dimension of my biography, to be aware that some of the ideals that I had didn't seem to work. And so at the same time, as I said, it was the Vietnam War, and I was living with that. And my father, my family was from central Vietnam, so part of the family was with the North Vietnamese, some part with the South Vietnamese, and so even my own family was divided through the war. So this acute awareness of the war is something that simply lived with me, and I will let go of everything that I did in between. But I guess what led me to the ICRC was this experience of being aware of the reality of the war and the suffering it brings, and trying to find ways to contribute, and having lost the faith that political engagement in terms of what I had thought as a student would be helpful, then I guess humanitarian work was the second best option. And while I was in the ICRC, obviously, as all of you were there, we had many different experiences. One of the, I would like just to share two moments that were very determining in my reflection. So on one hand, of course, I felt that the work that we were doing at the ICRC was extremely meaningful and necessary and important. On the other hand, what frustrated me after a while was the fact that we were a bit like fire, like extinguisher. So once it starts burning, then we arrive, but it's always too late in a way, because the war is there, the suffering is there, the killing is there, and so on. And I was really asking myself, so is that enough? And is there anything that we can do more on the prevention side, rather than just trying to pick up the pieces when they have already been broken? So that was something that really lived with me. And I was really questioning myself about the causes of all this violence, all these wars, all this that I had experienced. And from childhood on with the Vietnam War, and then continuing in the various war zones or conflict zones with the ICRC. And so what really struck me, and I mean, I'm stating the obvious, is that, a lot of the wars the war zones where I went, I was very aware of the economic dimension of it. So that, the economic implications of, for instance, oil production and transport, or the vested interests of big nations about their economic interest in various areas of the world, and the proxy war that are being fought there. And of course, I knew it from Vietnam, because Vietnam was a typical proxy war between the two sides of the Iron Curtains, the Americans on one side and the Russian and the Chinese on the other side. So I'd experienced directly, this kind of proxy war, and that had always a very strong economic dimension, also ideological, obviously, but the economic is always very, very strong. And then I went to Darfur, and it really puzzled me, because obviously, for those of you who knew Darfur, there's nothing there. I mean, there's no oil. I mean, South Sudan, there's oil, but in Darfur, there's absolutely nothing. It's desert, and it's, there's no big economic interest to be found there. No oil, no precious minerals, nothing. And what really struck me was the fact that Darfur was really a war around water. And that was like a wake-up call for me, realizing that the wars of the 20th centuries were mainly wars around economic resources such as oil and precious minerals and so on, but that we were moving towards a time where a lot of the wars would be around ecological issues. So, water and desertification and large movements of population created by climate change and so on. And so it was for me kind of a wake-up call to ask me, so if we want to work somehow preventively, we need to look at the causes of these of the ecological destruction, and what is the kind of economy that we are having that leads to so much violence. So the economic system itself, there's like the physical violence that you witness when you have armies and wars and fights. But then there's a structural violence, and actually the structural violence kills many more people than the actual physical violence. So it was really this question around structural violence, systemic violence that I was very concerned with, and asking myself, would there be another economic, political, social model that would not necessarily lead to the kind of violence that we see around us? So these were the questions that I really lived with. That was the macro, the level, and on a micro level, so personal level. There was at one point I had a very striking experience. I was in a prison in the Middle East, and we had been visiting prisoners, and I was resting in the courtyard. It was extremely hot. It was in the desert. And a young soldier came to me and started chatting with me. And, the whole morning I had spent listening to detainees telling me the stories. And as you know, these kind of stories can be pretty tough. And when this young soldier came and started talking with me, I really felt a kind of very strong antipathy, a sort of pushback. I didn't want to speak with him. And he noticed it, obviously. And after a while, he looked at me and he asked me, do you think I'm evil? And it really touched me, it really somehow touched me very deeply. And I realized, this young man is about the age of my son. And again, it's a structural situation that makes him being there. It's not a personal choice, that he wants to be a soldier and he wants to be a prison guard. It's just like, the way wars always are, old men sending young men to get killed and killing for their sake, not for the sake of the old ones, right? And it really touched me, and I really felt that it's so easy to judge, and it's quite natural. You will take sides with the victims, and you will judge the perpetrators, which is natural and normal. But then it's also very easy, very superficial, and I felt that, although we have the principle of neutrality, impartiality, and so on, humanity, it's not easy to really live it. And I really felt that I was not really living it. I mean, I was definitely biased, and so I really made the effort to listen to this young man and to speak with him, and it was very moving because it started telling me that actually he wanted to be a social worker when he comes back from his military service, and he's trying to do something for his community, and I really noticed that he wanted me to look beyond the appearance and the uniform and the machine gun, and realize that I'm the one sitting here with the Red Cross, and it's easy to be the good guy on the good side, but he was suffering a lot too. And so this was a different level of experience. You see, on one level, experiencing the macro dimension, and the other one experiencing the human dimension, and asking myself, so what can we do to better prevent this kind of terrible things? So that's in a brief, that were like there would be many more, but I just wanted to share two examples that led me to reflect. So what are the alternatives if I want to not only try to repair what's been broken, but try to prevent and contribute to a economic system, social system, political system, ecological system that is wholesome, that is not perpetrating this structural violence. So it's at that moment that I decided to leave the ICRC. I was already, end of 50s, and I had no idea what I would do, and it was a bit of a reckless decision to to just stop my job and not knowing what would happen next, but just feeling okay, I need to move on now. And it's at that time that it was 2011. And the royal government of Bhutan had presented a resolution to the United Nations called Happiness and Wellbeing Towards a New Development Paradigm. And the resolution had been adopted by the General Assembly, and then Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, asked Bhutan to convene what was called a high-level meeting in New York in 2012 to try to contextualize and make it practical, because saying, okay, happiness and well-being as a new development paradigm is a very abstract, it sounds nice, but concretely, practically, what do you do, And so that was the idea, to try to make it into something more concrete that member states could actually, apply, and not just a very vague idea of, So in 2012, the Royal Government of Bhutan decided to create a Gross National Happiness Center to prepare for this high-level meeting in New York, and then they looked for a program director for this center, and somehow I got hold of of this announcement, and I applied, and I didn't know anyone in Bhutan. I'm not Bhutanese. I'm half Vietnamese, half French, and somehow I got accepted, and I got the job. Even today, I'm not sure why I got the job, but the fact is I got the job. Sorry, I need to restart. My presentation has a problem. Excuse me. I'll just restart it so that I can show it to you properly. Okay, I got it. Just give me a minute. That's the kind of things with presentations. They work as long as you're alone at home, and then when you're supposed to show them, they don't work anymore. Yeah. We're back on. And so when I started, working on this project, happiness and well-being as a new development paradigm, the first thing was, what do we mean by happiness? It's such a vague and abstract concept, and very personal. People feel, well, it's a very personal thing. What makes me happy doesn't make other people happy. How can that make any sense, to use happiness and well-being as a governmental strategy, economic strategy, development strategy? It doesn't seem to make much sense. So we convened a scientific conference.
Excuse me, sorry, did you want to share it again, your screen?
Oh,
just in case.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Okay,
no.
Let me share again. Am I back on?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And so the question was, so what is happiness? And when I'm sharing my screen, the presentation doesn't seem to work for some reason. Oh yeah, got it. And so, so the question is, what do we mean by happiness? And so we started. We convened a high-level a scientific conference in Columbia University in New York, and we had 70 or 80 of the best experts from all kind of fields, research field, to get together and discuss about what do we mean by happiness. And fundamentally, what came out was that there's two levels of happiness. That under the word happiness, we speak of two very different things. And in the Greek philosophy, there were two different concepts. One was hedonia, so, hedonism, which is pleasure, and the other one is eudaimonia. Eu means beautiful or harmonious, and daimonia it doesn't mean demon, but it's daimon in the Platonic sense, which is our true being, our highest potential. So basically, eudaimonia means living in harmony with one's true being or highest potential.
Did you mean to share the screen again? Because we're not seeing it right now.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. I don't know, when I share the screen, the presentation doesn't work. And when I'm not sharing the screen, the presentation works. Yeah, now it works. Okay, do you see it now, right? Okay, and so Aristotle, for instance, said happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. And if you know a little bit about Greek philosophy, Aristotle was not an hedonist. For him, happiness had to do with virtue, with doing good. And so we try to, kind of come with a definition or a understanding of happiness that would be more encompassing than the superficial idea of happiness equal pleasure or good mood or something like that. And I would like you to listen to what the Prime Minister of Bhutan, in an interview that he gave at that time, had to say about it.
GNH, or gross national happiness, is the philosophy that had guided Bhutan's development process for about now 40 years. It is based on the belief that development must serve a purpose, that development's role is not simply to promote continuous and limitless economic growth, which is what GDP or the conventional economic models tend to do. And that again, within a finite environment, within a finite world, there are bounds within which growth can take place. Natural, social, resources, and so forth. And so GNH is based on the belief that development must be human-centered, and that its objective must be to create those conditions that will enable the human individual to achieve what is most important to him. And that happens to be happiness. And then again, happiness, we believe, is a condition that can be attained when one is able to balance the needs of the body with those of the mind, the physical and the mental needs being balanced. And likewise, the balance between the spiritual needs of the human individual and the material needs. And so it is a human-centered, holistic, sustainable, and inclusive development approach. Now, more and more people who are dissatisfied with the result of pursuing an economic development that is no longer seen to be sustainable, they are seeing GNH as an alternative development paradigm.
And so we try to sort of summarize that in saying that when we speak of happiness in the context of gross national happiness, we speak of three levels that are interdependent. One is living in harmony and knowing how to care for oneself, meaning that we feel that our life is the expression of our values. Our life is aligned with what we truly believe in. Our life is gives us the opportunity to manifest our highest potential. And of course, this means taking the time to slow down and stop and go within and figuring out what are my values and what is truly important for me, and not just being, determined by external factors. So living in harmony with oneself. And the second one is living in harmony with others. And we have a lot of scientific evidence about the importance of the quality of human relationships. And we are, like, simply from our own life experience, we all know that basically what really makes a very strong impact on our day-to-day life is the quality of the relationship that we have within our family, within our community, with our colleagues, and so on and so forth. And I remember when I was working in the ICRC, at one point I was the head of learning and development, and I was, going around in many delegations and to make needs assessments. What did the people need? And what really struck me is that very often when people were really, stressed and overwhelmed. I'm not speaking now of people having gone through extreme personal traumatic experience of extreme life-threatening experiences, but of what most of the delegates and local employees experience on a daily basis, which is oftentimes living in very uncertain conditions and conflict areas. But then, more often than not, what people reported, what really stressed them, was bad working condition within the team, bad relationships, a boss that was bullying them, or conflicts with the colleagues. And so even in a situation where you might think that the outer conditions that are very challenging are the main source of suffering or stress, or oftentimes you realize actually it's the quality of human relationships that is still, even this extreme situation, determinant for your well-being or the lack thereof. Mm-hmm. And of course, in normal life situation, this is obvious. I mean, we all know from experience, if we go to work every morning and we know there's a nice team with a good atmosphere and people supporting each other and a nice team spirit, even if we have a lot to do, it's okay in the end, right? But if we go to work and we know there's going to be conflicts and bad atmosphere and tensions and so on, even if we have less work, it's much more tiring and exhausting. And so, anyway, the strongest scientific evidence that we have is the so-called Harvard Grant study. It was a study that was conducted over almost 50 years. Through several generations of researchers conducted by Harvard University on adult life, to try to understand which were the factors that had the strongest impact on mental and physical well-being of people. And they analyzed many, many factors. And what really came out as the most important factor, more important than things like whether people drink or don't drink, smoke or don't smoke, are overweight or not overweight, and so forth and so on, that you might say, oh yeah, of course, that has a strong influence on physical health, I'm saying. Even on physical health, the factor that had the strongest impact was the quality of human relationships. So those people who reported having good, harmonious, strong relationship, feeling well integrated in a community, whatever community it is. It can be the family, it can be a church, it can be a club, it can be a workplace. It doesn't matter. It's just feeling part of a community, knowing that I'm there for others and others are there for me. So these, quality of human relationships turned out to be the strongest determining factor for physical, mental, obviously, but also physical well-being and even life expectancy. And the third one is living in harmony with nature and the planet, which in the time of extreme ecological challenges and climate change has become obvious. If we don't learn as a humankind to live in harmony with nature, well, there will be no happiness to speak about, because for obvious reason, if we are destroying our ecosystem, then, we are actually, it's a kind of a slow suicide. So this is how we are trying in the context of gross national happiness to summarize what we mean by happiness is not just feeling happy, but being happy. It's a difference. Feeling happy, feelings come and go. I mean, they change all the time. You cannot hold a feeling of happiness all the time. But being happy is not just a feeling, it's this threefold harmony that, that we know we have a life that is meaningful, where we can make a contribution and where we feel aligned with ourselves. We have a lasting, good relationship based on love and friendship and trust. And we know how to live in harmony with nature and the planet. So these were the three elements that we put as at the heart of the idea of gross national happiness. So let me share with you a little bit about the history of gross national happiness. So gross national happiness, the word, the formulation came from a young king, the fourth king of Bhutan, who was 17 at the moment where he ascended the throne, and interestingly enough, was wise enough to realize that he didn't know what he should do. At that time, Bhutan was still an absolute monarchy. It's not anymore. It's constitutional, but at that time it was an absolute monarchy. And he realized he didn't know what he should do. So what he did, and it was amazingly wise, he went around the country for 2 years and listened to the people. And that in itself is a very strong message, that G&H started by listening. So not somebody really clever telling others what to do, but somebody being humble enough to listen to what do actual people need. And so that was the starting point, and that was the fourth king of Bhutan. And at one point he was asked, so what's the GDP, or at that time one used to say GNP, so gross national happiness. Now we tend to say gross domestic product, but gross national product, sorry. And now we tend to say gross domestic product. What's the GDP or the GNP of Bhutan anyway? And of course, it's very small compared with India and China. Bhutan is squeezed between these two giants. And the king said, well, to me, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And in this simple phrase, he coined a really important message, which is to say that we have mistaken the goal and the means. So economic growth is, of course, important, but it's not a goal. It's just a mean to an end. The end is to improve the life quality of the people. But in the capitalistic neoliberal society, we've forgotten that. We do as if economic growth was an end in itself. And, like, if you look at, for instance, now recently, 7,000 people have been fired from Twitter, because for economic reason, the company is more important than the people. And that's just one symptom that you find everywhere, that in the neoliberal capitalistic system, people are in service of the economy. And if they are not useful to our economy, they get dumped. And this is totally absurd, because the economy is just a subsystem that is supposed to serve the people, not the other way around, right? And so interestingly enough, this idea that GDP, or gross domestic product, or gross national product, is completely misunderstood, was first formulated by Robert Kennedy. And I would like you to hear Kennedy's speech that he made in 1968 that is almost prophetic.
Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community value in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that, That gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising, and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwoods and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and sex knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans.
So the idea that gross domestic product or gross national product can measure everything except that which makes life worthwhile is at the very heart of the idea of gross national happiness. Because, as Kennedy very pointedly expressed, everything that increases economic production is considered per se positive. Therefore, wars do increase gross national product or gross domestic product of all the arms building countries, and therefore is considered positive from a purely economic perspective. Likewise, as Kennedy said, things like cigarette advertising, even natural catastrophes, if they increase the GDP, they are considered positive, while everything that is not connected with a financial transaction is not counted. So I did a research, for instance, in Switzerland. And, you know, Switzerland is a very small country. In Switzerland, there are more hours of unpaid work a year than of paid work. And most of this unpaid work is done by women. Now, if all the women, all the people, but especially all the women who do a lot of the unpaid work, like, you know, household and taking care of children, taking care of old parents, and so on and so forth, would ask to be paid to do it, the economy would collapse, because we have more hours of unpaid work than of paid work in an advanced economic society like Switzerland. And this is never counted for because it's not connected with financial transaction. So we realize that measuring the development of society only by financial transaction is a nonsense. For instance, the European Union a few years ago decided to include drug trafficking and human trafficking in the GDP measurement, which makes sense because it generates a lot of income. And of course, the GDP was growing because drugs and human trafficking is a lot of money. And obviously, it doesn't mean that, it means that the more there is, the more money, there's a growth, but obviously this growth has negative social impact. So if we measure development by GDP, we cannot make the difference between those economic activities that has a positive social impact, like investing in education, health, in infrastructure, and those economic activities that have a negative impact on society, like drug trafficking, human trafficking, and so on and so forth. So the idea was to say, if we want to truly measure the development of a country, we cannot limit ourselves to measure GDP, and GNH is an alternative. But then what people told us is, and rightly so, you know, happiness or gross national happiness is sort of an ideal. It's a kind of very vague, and GDP, it's a measurement tool. So you cannot replace a measurement tool by an ideal or an utopia or something sentimental. You have to replace it through a better measurement tool. And so that's how the GNH index was developed. So what I'm showing here is a kind of a framework. I won't go very much into it, but just that you see the overall framework. So if the goal is societal happiness, then you have A. It means that we need to make sure that the legitimate needs of the people are met, and also be aware that these needs are not only physical. In order to do that, we need a holistic developmental agenda. And this is what we call the 4 pillars of GNH, which is environment, economic development, yes, but sustainable and equitable and fair. Then culture, and finally good governance. And then C, in this within the finite resources of the planet. So you have the green line around it. So to really always reflect is what we are doing within the finite, the planetary boundaries. And then we have the measurement tool, which is the 9 domains of gross national happiness, which is the index that we use to measure the development of a nation, of an organization, and so on and so forth, of a school, of a business. And then we have E, and that's very unique to GNH, happiness skills. And I would like then to, afterwards, I will go back a little bit to happiness skills. So it means the fundamental idea is that, let me go back, that in order to have a happy society, you have to balance conducive environment, structural condition, a systemic condition that are conducive to happiness and well-being. And this is what we're trying to show here. But we also need to have the inner conditions. So before I go into that, I'll just give you a quick view of the 9 domains of gross national happiness. These are the 9 domains that we measure when we do the GNH index. And then there are indicators and variables. I won't go into that. That's a long topic, but just that you know that GNH is an actual measurement tool. It's not just a vague ideal. It's a statistic measurement tool that has been implemented in several places. And now more and more countries are using well-being indicators like Iceland, New Zealand, Scotland, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Sweden, even France has started, but is not really doing very far with it. But they do have a measurement tool, but as far as I know, it's not been implemented very much. Likewise with Italy and United Kingdom, they have built the tools, but they are not taking the political decision in accordance with these tools, unfortunately. But one of the very interesting example is New Zealand with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who has really been pursuing this idea of well-being, societal well-being, as a tool, and she has also a well-being budget and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in understanding more about that, follow her. She's been really an example. So has Nicola Sturgeon from Scotland. The goal of economic policy should be collective well-being, how happy and healthy a population is, not just how wealthy a population is. So that's the same idea. And she's also been implementing very interesting things. And then the Prime Minister of Iceland. So it's interesting that in 3 cases, I don't want to be gender biased, but I have to admit that in all these 3 very prominent cases where ladies were really the one showing the way. So these are just more some of the external, the structural condition. And now we have been really studying what are the scientific foundation of the happiness skills, so the inner dimensions of happiness, being aware that in order to reach a certain level of happiness and well-being, we need to balance the inner and the outer conditions. That outer conditions alone will never be sufficient. But only to look at the inner condition would not be sufficient either, because both are interdependent and having an effect on one another. So what we are trying to do in GNH is to develop both a conducive environment, social environment, and also to cultivate happiness skills. And our conviction is that happiness is based on skills, and as all skills, they can be learned. And the first one is mindfulness. And it's very interesting that mindfulness is a very ancient spiritual wisdom that you find in most cultures. But now we have a lot of scientific evidence that shows that it's not just an ideology or a religious belief, but we have a lot of scientific evidence that show the impact of mindfulness on the body and on the mind. And one of the prominent researchers is a German researcher, Tanja Singer, who did the research on the impact of meditation funded by the European Union. And all these results have been published, so you can find them. It's called the Resource Project. And she has been really able to show what, with very detailed scientific investigation, how the various meditation practices have a real impact both on body and mind. So just a few sentences on mindfulness. So it's about paying attention intentionally, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And if you agree with me, I would like us to do a little moment of mindfulness practice, because I've been speaking a lot already and you need a break and I need a break, and we can just come back to ourselves. So I would like to invite us to find a comfortable position to sit. If you can, keep your back upright. Feel the connection with the floor, with your chair. Bring your attention back to the body. And simply observe how you feel right now in your body, fresh or tired. Relaxed or tensed. Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or simply neutral? Becoming aware of the body, we are aware of our breathing. As we breathe in, we know we're breathing in. And as we breathe out, we know we're breathing out. We don't manipulate the breathing, we simply observe it. We are present to the fact that we are breathing. Aware of the body, aware of the breathing, we're aware of the mind. Is it quiet or turbulent? Focused or distracted? And we don't judge it. We don't judge that, oh, if it's quiet, it's good. If it's distracted, it's bad. We simply observe. We just notice How does it feel in my body? How is my breathing? Deep or shallow? Fast or slow? How is the mind? Peaceful or agitated? We simply observe with kindness, with gentleness. We welcome whatever it is that we are experiencing right now. Allowing to be just how it is. Thank you for joining me in this little exercise. So mindfulness is the first component of happiness skills because it's the basis that allows for the second dimension, which is emotional intelligence. And this is Daniel Goleman, who's the American psychologist who's sort of the father, or he didn't invent it, but he's the one who really made it available and popular, of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence or social emotional learning has 5 fundamental components. The first one is self-management or self-awareness. Self-awareness or self-knowledge. So just knowing ourselves, knowing our emotions, knowing our strengths and weaknesses. And so it's this taking stock of where we're at, slowing down, stopping, looking inward and observing. This allows self-awareness. Self-awareness leads to the possibility of self-management, knowing how to deal with difficult, painful emotions, and also how to cultivate positive states of mind, positive traits, such as generosity, gratitude, kindness. Because we know from research that these inner attitudes that can be cultivated generate positive emotions and enhance our happiness and well-being. The next one is social awareness, empathy, and compassion. Our ability to be present for others, to be aware of what other people are feeling, experiencing. Open heart. So the first one is very much about open mind. This is about open heart. And that leads to relationship skills, friendship and love, positive relationships, teamwork, trust, confidence, and so on, what we have discussed before. And that these 4 are the basis for ethical decision-making, responsible decision-making. So these are the 5 components of social emotional learning, and mindfulness together with emotional intelligence are for us the 2 pillars that we cultivate when we implement gross national happiness programs. So there's the structural part, and then there's the inner part. And these are some aspects of the inner part. And we have been working with Yale University, with Harvard University, with Oxford University on the development of this science of well-being. And the goal really is to move from an ego-centered consciousness, self-centered ego consciousness, to an eco-consciousness, so a widened consciousness that includes the well-being of all beings, of all people and of all beings. So to finish, if you still have a bit of patience, I will take maybe 5 or 10 more minutes to show you practically what does it mean when we implement it. So we have been implementing it. So there's the national implementations that I've briefly spoke about, which is more about measurement of a country. Bhutan was the first one, as I showed. There are now many other countries that are starting to get interested in that. Then we implement it in businesses because we believe that businesses, economy is a big part of the problem. If we cannot reform the economy, it will be difficult to change society. So we've been working with a number of businesses. Here are some examples. Big Rim is a large energy company in Thailand that now have become the largest sustainable energy company in Asia. Alien Fisher is women fashion. BTS is a shoe producer. SIG, the Swiss among you will know it, is Service Industriel de Genève. It's electricity, water, internet, and so services for Geneva. And these are all companies that have started implementing the principle of gross national happiness in their companies. So the first one we worked with was Big Rim. That was in Thailand. That was about 10 years ago or so. And they changed in their vision statement as doing business with compassion for the development of civilization in harmony with nature. So you see the three components. Yeah, compassion is the personal one. Civilization is with others, and then in harmony with nature. And these were some of the workshops that we gave. That was the senior management team. And it was not just lip service. As I said, they became the largest sustainable energy company in Southeast Asia, and they've been very successful with that. And this included training their managers in mindfulness, emotional intelligence, a new management style that was really focusing on the well-being of all the co-workers rather than just on efficiency and pushing people. So, for instance, now in all their meetings, they always start every meeting with a moment of mindfulness and then in emotional sharing, so like in a weather report, so that people bring their whole human being in the company and not just a function. And we even worked in the factories, so that has been a very exciting project. And the last, one of the latest was BTS. It's quite a big company. 10,000 staff, 20 million pair of shoes, 1,500 shops. And this is the latest company that was certified as a G&H company. You see, this is using the 9 domains to measure the development of the company between 2018 2021, not just financially, but using all the 9 domains as a measurement tool. And this was the certification ceremony when we awarded the company as a G&H company. The young lady next to me is the CEO of the company. Then we've been implementing G&H in education in Vietnam, in Thailand, at high school, university level and at school level. So in university, we have been working with universities in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Switzerland. We have a 1-year program at the Geneva Management School, so HEG, Haute École de Gestion, and in Germany, Osnabrück University, and we're developing more programs. And at school level, we have a very large school program bringing happiness and well-being to schools in Vietnam, with many, many schools working in that. So these are some of the pictures. This was in Germany. Die Gestaltungskraft des Glücks is the way the course is called in Germany. It's in Osnabrück. In Switzerland, it's in Haute École de Gestion in Geneva. It's Bonheur dans les organisations. We already had 4 groups going through. It's a 1-year program that people do while working. And now we are starting the 5th one in January or February. These were some of the participants in Germany and in Switzerland. And then Happy School, we are having a very large program in Germany, and now it's starting in Switzerland. So that was the curriculum that we designed. It's a teacher training curriculum based on, self-care, care for others and society, care for the environment and the planet, the 3 dimensions of well-being. These are Vietnamese children practicing mindfulness in the classroom. It's very sweet, because it's a communist country. They still have the red, scarf of the little pioneers, but they practice mindfulness. So that's been a great joy to work in the schools of Vietnam. And we also have done practices this is in gymnasium in Germany, so high school in Germany. So that was what I wanted to share. Just for those of you who want to know more about it, I wrote a book in English. It's called A Culture of Happiness. And there's also a book in French called Le Bonheur National Brut. It's just came out 1 or 2 weeks ago. It's Édition Jouvence and easy to obtain in any bookshop. And that's the end of my presentation.